I bet you've never met a man who timed his cruelty down to the second his wife's heart stopped beating. My mother's monitor flatlined at 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. By 2:16, my father was on the phone with his accountant. By sunrise, he'd changed the locks on the house I grew up in. And by Friday, he stood in front of our entire family and told them I was dead to him. What he didn't realize was that my mother had spent the last 19 months quietly, methodically, building a trap so elegant that it would only spring the moment he revealed who he truly was. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 29 years old, and this is the story of how my father destroyed himself in front of 400 people because he couldn't keep his mask on for just 3 more weeks. Hello everyone. Welcome to Distorted Family Revenge. If you're new here, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This one is personal. For 6 years, I was the invisible engine behind Dawson Creative Partners, one of the most respected brand strategy firms on the East Coast. My father, Victor Dawson, was the name on the door, the face in Adweek profiles, the man who accepted Effie Awards in a custom suit while I sat in a back office, writing the campaigns that won them. My official title was Junior Strategist. My actual role was everything. I built the Meridian Hotel's rebrand from scratch, the one that increased their bookings by 40% and landed us on Fast Company's most innovative list. My father presented it to the client over a steak dinner I wasn't invited to. I created the Luma skincare launch strategy that generated $120 million in first-year revenue. My father's quote in the press release said he'd been developing the concept for over a year. He hadn't touched the brief once. My mother, Diane, saw everything. She was the firm's original co-founder, the one who'd brought in half the client roster through her connections in New York's fashion and media circles. But my father had slowly pushed her out over the years, reducing her role from partner to consultant to, eventually, nothing. She still had her name on the founding documents, but he treated her like a retired figurine on a shelf. Mom would try to intervene carefully. Victor, Claire developed the entire Meridian pitch. Maybe she should present it. And he'd shut it down instantly. Claire's not ready for client-facing work. She doesn't have the executive presence. This industry rewards confidence, not just competence. Executive presence. That was his favorite phrase, a polished way of saying she's not me. My salary was $52,000 a year. Industry standard for someone running campaigns of that scale was around $140,000, plus bonuses. But I stayed because my mother asked me to, because she said family businesses take time, because she promised that things would change. Then they did change, just not the way any of us expected. In January, Mom was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. Aggressive. The oncologist used words like debulking surgery and platinum-based chemotherapy with the clinical detachment of someone reading a weather forecast. My father's first question wasn't about her prognosis. It was about whether the treatment would interfere with the firm's spring client presentations. As Mom got sicker, 2 things happened simultaneously. My father got bolder about erasing me, and my mother started disappearing every Wednesday afternoon. Estate planning, she told me, adjusting her silk scarf over her thinning hair. Just making sure you're protected, sweetheart. I assumed she meant life insurance. I had no idea she meant war. By August, my father wasn't even bothering to remove my initials from the draft files before putting his name on final presentations. The Wexford Automotive campaign was the breaking point. A $30 million account, the biggest in the firm's history. I'd spent 5 months building a multi-channel strategy that reimagined how luxury car brands connect with younger buyers. Data modeling, audience segmentation, creative direction, media planning, every single element was mine. The pitch deck's title slide read, Reimagining Luxury Mobility, a Vision by Victor Dawson. When I confronted him about it in his office, he didn't even look up from his phone. Everything produced under this roof belongs to the firm, and I am the firm. That's how business works. You'll understand when you're older. I was 29. I had an MBA from Columbia. But in his eyes, I was permanently a child playing at her father's desk. That same week, while organizing Mom's medical paperwork during one of her chemo sessions, I discovered something buried in a stack of insurance forms. Corporate restructuring documents dated 18 months earlier. My father had systematically transferred all shared assets, the firm's intellectual property portfolio, the client contracts, even the office building lease, into entities he solely controlled. Mom's co-founder equity had been diluted to almost nothing through a series of board votes she'd apparently approved while medicated after her first surgery. It's standard corporate housekeeping, my father had told her. I'm simplifying things so you don't have to worry while you're recovering. November 14th, 2:14 a.m. The hospice nurse touched my shoulder gently. I'd been holding Mom's hand for 7 hours, reading to her from the book she loved most, the one about the garden that comes back to life after winter. She hadn't opened her eyes since Monday, but I kept reading, because I needed to believe she could hear the part about the flowers returning. My father was in the guest bedroom. He'd moved there in September, saying the medical equipment disrupted his sleep quality. Sleep quality. His wife was dying 15 feet away, and he was worried about thread counts. He appeared at 6 a.m., clean-shaven, wearing the gray cashmere sweater Mom had given him for their anniversary. Not the funeral one, the one he wore to impress clients. His first words were logistical. Have they called the funeral home yet? I need to speak with Patterson before the office opens. Patterson was his lawyer, not the funeral director, not our pastor, his corporate attorney. The memorial service was on November 18th at Grace Cathedral. 400 people filled the nave, overflowing into the side chapels. Mom had touched so many lives through her charity work with arts education programs across the city. The flowers were extraordinary. White lilies and gardenias, her favorites, filling the space with a sweetness that felt like her. My father delivered the eulogy like a keynote speech. Diane was my greatest supporter, he told the congregation. She understood that behind every successful man, there needs to be a woman willing to step aside gracefully. She never sought the spotlight. She was content to let others shine. Content. My mother, who'd built half the firm's client base, who'd mentored dozens of young women in the industry, who'd hosted fundraisers that raised millions for education. She wasn't content. She was silenced. And he was rewriting her entire life in front of everyone who'd known her. After the service, during the reception in the cathedral hall, my father clinked his glass. I want to thank everyone for honoring Diane's memory. Her passing is a tremendous loss, but I want to assure our friends and colleagues that Dawson Creative Partners will continue to thrive. In fact, I'll be making some important changes to ensure our next chapter is even stronger. He looked directly at me. Claire has decided to step away from the firm to pursue other opportunities. We wish her well. The house will also be transitioning. Diane would have wanted Claire to spread her wings. He paused, smiling the way he smiled when he closed a deal. Fresh starts are healthy for everyone. The room went silent. My Aunt Margot, Mom's sister, grabbed my arm so hard it bruised. My mother's business partner from her charity board literally gasped out loud. Even the cathedral's reverend looked uncomfortable. As my father passed me to greet a client, he leaned in close. You have until Monday. Take what you can carry. Your mother's not here to make excuses for you anymore. At his wife's memorial, in a cathedral, with 400 people watching. If you've ever had someone you trusted reveal exactly who they are at the worst possible moment, you know the feeling. It's not just betrayal, it's the ground disappearing beneath you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe if you want to hear what happened next. Because what my father didn't know is that this was exactly the moment my mother had been waiting for. That evening, my phone buzzed with an email from a firm I'd never heard of, Castillo Legal Group. Subject line: Urgent matter regarding the estate of Diane Whitfield, Dawson. Please contact immediately. My mother's maiden name. She'd used her maiden name. I almost dismissed it as spam. But something made me call. A woman named Elena Castillo answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. Claire, I'm so sorry about your mother. She was an extraordinary woman, and she left very specific instructions that I contact you the moment your father showed his true colors. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? The office was on the 30th floor of a building downtown that I'd walked past 1,000 times without noticing. Elena Castillo was in her mid-50s, calm and precise, with the energy of someone who played chess while everyone else played checkers. Your mother came to me 19 months ago, she said. She knew exactly what your father would do when she was gone. She just needed to build the architecture to let him do it to himself. Elena placed a folder on the table. The will that was read at your house was legitimate, but it was only half the story. There's a codicil filed separately with my office, executed 8 months ago, with 3 independent witnesses and 2 psychiatric evaluations, confirming your mother's full mental capacity. I opened it. Mom's handwriting on the signature line. Dated March 15th. The codicil was dense with legal language, but Elena highlighted the critical clause. If Victor Dawson engages in any act of public cruelty, professional sabotage, or denial of rightful inheritance toward Claire Dawson within 45 days of Diane's passing, all assets designated in the primary will shall immediately transfer to the Diane Whitfield Foundation, with Claire Dawson as permanent executive director. He triggered it at the memorial, Elena said. I have 14 sworn statements from witnesses who heard both his public announcement and his private threat. Plus this. She played an audio recording from her phone. My father's voice, unmistakable. Your mother's not here to make excuses for you anymore. A guest had been recording the reception on their phone. Mom had identified 3 people in advance, who she knew would be filming and positioned the confrontation accordingly. She predicted he'd do it publicly? Elena smiled. She said his ego wouldn't let him wait. He'd need an audience for his cruelty. She was right within 4 days. But there was more. So much more. Elena explained that the Diane Whitfield Foundation had been established 18 months ago as a charitable trust with a dual mandate, funding arts education for underserved communities and holding ownership stakes in for-profit creative enterprises. It already controlled 42% of Dawson Creative Partners through a series of acquisitions made through 3 separate holding entities. My mother had been buying shares for a year and a half. Every quarterly filing, every stock transfer, my father had signed off on without reading, because my mother had always handled what he called the boring paperwork. With the assets from the will transferring to the foundation, Elena continued, we'll have enough to acquire an additional 9% on the open market. That gives you 51%. Controlling interest. My mother, while dying of cancer, had spent 19 months disassembling my father's empire piece by piece and rebuilding it as a fortress around me. Every document bulletproof, every signature authenticated, every contingency planned for. She also recorded this, Elena said, handing me a tablet. Mom appeared on screen, thinner than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp, focused, burning with the intensity I'd always known was there beneath her quiet exterior. The recording was dated July, 4 months before she died. My darling Claire, if you're watching this, it means your father has done exactly what I knew he would. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from the pain of his cruelty, but I could make sure it was the last time he ever had power over you. Everything I've built in these months is yours. Not as a gift, but as a restoration. He stole your work, your confidence, your name. I'm giving them back. I sat in Elena's office and cried for 20 minutes. Not from sadness, from the overwhelming realization that my mother had been fighting for me with every breath she had left. The Wexford pitch was scheduled for December 3rd, the biggest presentation in the firm's history. 400 people, industry press, the client's entire C-suite. My father had been promoting it for weeks as the pinnacle of his career. We wait for the pitch, Elena said. Maximum visibility, maximum witnesses. The next 2 weeks were surgical. Every night, I gathered evidence. The firm's servers logged every file by user ID. 6 years of campaigns, all created under my login, all presented under my father's name. Timestamps at 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m. Hundreds of nights I'd worked until dawn while he slept. Rosa, the office's night cleaning supervisor who'd watched me work late for years, connected me with the building's security archive. Every night you were here, every morning he walked in fresh and took the credit. My mother used to bring Rosa's kids' school supplies every September. November 22nd. My father sent a company-wide email. Claire Dawson's employment is terminated effective immediately for failure to meet performance standards. He'd CC'd every industry contact in his database. By noon, trade publications were running stories about nepotism in creative agencies. My LinkedIn was flooded with comments about entitled millennials who couldn't hack it outside daddy's firm. He'd orchestrated a public execution of my professional reputation. November 25th. My father held a press conference, supposedly about the Wexford pitch, but really a platform to bury me deeper. 60 journalists in the conference room. I watched the live stream from Elena's office. Before we discuss Wexford, he began with rehearsed sadness. I want to address recent changes. It's never easy when family can't meet professional standards. I spent 6 years trying to develop Claire's abilities. Unfortunately, talent isn't inherited. I had to make the difficult decision to let her go for her own growth. A reporter asked about rumors that I'd designed key campaigns. My father laughed. Claire helped with some research tasks. Administrative support, basically. The creative vision that requires decades of experience, she simply doesn't possess. November 28th. James Harrington, chairman of Dawson Creative's advisory board, called me privately. We met at a diner in Brooklyn, far from the industry's usual haunts. He looked exhausted. I've watched your father take credit for your work since your first year, he said. The board knows. We've always known. Your mother asked us to wait. She said she had a plan and that we needed to trust her timing. He slid a folder across the table. 6 board members are ready to act when given cause. Your father's behavior since Diane's passing has been cause enough for all of us. My phone buzzed. Elena texted 4 words. 5 more days, Claire. December 2nd. Elena's conference room became a command center. 2 lawyers, a forensic accountant, and a court reporter reviewed everything one final time. The audio recording. The 14 witness affidavits. The server logs. The security footage. Mom's video testimony. A judge had signed a restraining order that morning, freezing all disputed assets the moment we presented the evidence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the window of my tiny apartment, the one I'd rented with 3 months of savings after my father threw me out, and read the last letter my mother had written me. She'd hidden it inside the lining of the jewelry box she'd left me, the one thing my father hadn't bothered to claim. You're ready, she'd written. Not because this will be easy, but because you've always been stronger than anyone gave you credit for. Including me. Including yourself. December dried. 2 p.m. The Grand Hyatt Ballroom in Midtown Manhattan was electric. Crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon light. 400 seats filled with the advertising industry's elite. Wexford Automotive's entire executive team occupied the front row. The stage held a massive screen displaying the campaign visuals, my visuals, with my father's name underneath. I stood at the entrance with Elena. The security guard checked his list. You're not on here, miss. Elena handed him a court order. Judge Okafor requires Miss Dawson's presence for legal proceedings related to this presentation. We entered just as my father took the stage. He looked like he was born for this moment. Tailored navy suit, confident stride, the smile of a man who believed he'd won everything. Welcome, everyone, he began. Today, you're going to see something revolutionary. The Wexford campaign represents the culmination of my life's work in brand strategy. 20 years of insight distilled into a single, transformative vision. The screen showed my audience segmentation model, the one I'd built using 3 months of consumer behavior data. He pointed to the demographic clusters I'd identified. I discovered that luxury automotive buyers under 40 respond to entirely different emotional triggers than traditional demographics. This insight, my insight, is what makes this campaign unprecedented. Elena stood up. Excuse me, Mr. Dawson. The room turned. My father's expression shifted from surprise to irritation. I'm afraid there's a legal matter that requires immediate attention. This is a private corporate event. And I have a court order that supersedes that, Elena replied, walking toward the stage. My father recovered quickly, smiling at the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse this minor disruption. Perhaps my colleague is confused about the schedule. I'm not confused at all, Elena said, now standing at the base of the stage. And neither was your wife. That landed. My father's smile cracked, just for a second. He pressed on, clicking to the next slide. The creative concept I'd spent 4 months developing. This campaign will redefine how luxury brands communicate with the next generation, he continued. My proprietary approach to emotional resonance marketing. Elena connected her phone to the ballroom's sound system. The hotel's AV team had been briefed that morning, with a court order compelling compliance. Mr. Dawson, are you finished claiming credit for work you didn't do? Because I have something the room needs to hear. My father's voice hardened. Security, please remove this woman. No one moved. Elena played the recording. Your mother's not here to make excuses for you anymore. The room went dead silent. Then the whispers started, building like a wave. That recording, Elena announced, was made at Diane Whitfield Dawson's memorial service on November 18th. Mr. Dawson made this statement to his daughter after publicly firing her and evicting her from her home at her mother's funeral. In front of 400 witnesses, she held up the court order. Under the terms of a legally binding codicil to Diane's will, this statement triggered the immediate transfer of all estate assets, valued at approximately $38 million, to the Diane Whitfield Foundation. Claire Dawson is the permanent executive director. Furthermore, the foundation already controls 42% of Dawson Creative Partners. With the transferred assets, Miss Dawson now holds 51% controlling interest in this company. The Wexford CEO turned to his legal team. 3 investors in the second row pulled out their phones. Journalists began typing furiously. I walked onto the stage carrying a laptop. My father stood frozen, his face shifting between rage and something I'd never seen on him before, fear. Since we're discussing the Wexford campaign, I said, keeping my voice steady, let's see who actually created it. I connected to the presentation system. The screen filled with file metadata, every version of the Wexford campaign, 38 drafts over 5 months, all logged under my user ID. The timestamps told the story. 2:15 a.m., 3:47 a.m., 4:30 a.m. While Mr. Dawson slept, I was building his masterpiece. The screen shifted to security footage. 6 years compressed into a devastating montage. Me entering the building in darkness, leaving at dawn, night after night, season after season. My father arriving at 9 a.m. Sharp, coffee in hand, walking into meetings to present what I'd created overnight. James Harrington stood. I can confirm this. The advisory board has known for years that Claire was the creative force behind this firm's success. Her mother asked us to wait for the right moment. Then Mom's face appeared on screen. Thin, tired but fierce, her voice filled the ballroom. I, Diane Whitfield Dawson, being of sound mind, do testify that my husband, Victor Dawson, has systematically stolen credit for our daughter Claire's creative work for 6 years. Every major campaign this firm has won awards for was conceived, developed, and executed by Claire. Victor has never originated a single strategic concept. I have the original briefs, drafts, and correspondence to prove it. The room erupted. The Wexford CEO stood up. We were told Victor Dawson personally developed this campaign. We need to reassess our entire engagement. My father finally found his voice. This is entrapment. She was dying. She wasn't thinking clearly. Elena pulled out a folder. Diane anticipated that claim. She underwent monthly psychiatric evaluations from January through October. 9 independent assessments, all confirming complete mental competence. She also maintained a detailed journal documenting every instance of professional theft over the past 6 years. Would you like me to read from it? My father's phone rang. He looked at the screen and went pale. Then it rang again, and again. Within minutes, the chain reaction my mother had predicted was unfolding in real time. His professional association called to suspend his membership pending review. A journalist from Ad Age was already tweeting. 2 board members approached Harrington about an emergency vote. Harrington took the microphone. As chairman of the advisory board, I'm calling an emergency session. All board members present, please identify yourselves. 8 hands went up. Motion for a vote of no confidence in CEO Victor Dawson. Seconded. All in favor? 8 hands rose. My father stayed down, clutching the podium like it was the last solid thing in his world. Motion carries. Victor Dawson is removed as CEO of Dawson Creative Partners, effective immediately. The board nominates Claire Dawson as interim CEO. I stepped forward. I appreciate the nomination, but I'll decline the CEO title. I'll serve as Chief Creative Officer, which is the role I've actually been performing for 6 years. The firm deserves a CEO who leads with honesty. We'll conduct a proper search. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. 400 people who'd just watched the truth rip through decades of lies. My father stood alone on the stage, his empire dissolving around him. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. Security approached, not aggressively, but firmly. "Dad," I said quietly, and the room stilled. "Mom left you a letter." Elena handed him an envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it. I knew what it said because Mom had read it to me in the hospital, one of the last clear conversations we had. "Victor, I loved you once, genuinely and completely. I stayed longer than I should have, hoping the man I married was still in there somewhere. He wasn't. This isn't revenge. This is correction. The foundation will provide you a dignified living if you choose to work honestly. Claire will decide the terms. I'm trusting her judgment because it was always better than either of ours. Please don't make her regret my mercy." He crumpled the letter in his fist. "I don't need pity from a dead woman." "Then you need to leave," Harrington said. "Now." Security escorted my father out past 400 silent witnesses. The same doors he'd walked through an hour earlier as a celebrated CEO, he now exited as a disgraced fraud. A photographer from Ad Age captured the exact moment, my father's face in the gap between the closing doors, staring back at the room that was no longer his. The story detonated across every platform within hours. The New York Times business section ran it that evening. By December 5th, the security footage montage had been viewed 3.8 million times. A 6-year time-lapse of a daughter working through the night while her father took credit for every dawn. Forbes ran a profile calling me the most important voice in creative industry reform. Fast Company updated their innovators list, replacing my father's name with mine on every campaign he'd claimed. The American Advertising Federation fast-tracked an ethics investigation. But the messages that mattered most came from strangers. "Your story gave me the courage to document my own situation. My creative director has been claiming my campaigns for 4 years. I have a meeting with an employment lawyer on Friday." Wexford Automotive reconvened their team within a week. They didn't just reinstate the engagement. They expanded it, with one condition: my name on every deliverable. "We know who we're investing in now," their CMO said. The transformation at Dawson Creative was immediate. We implemented an attribution system that tracked every contribution to every project. No more ghost work, no more stolen credit. We opened the books. We promoted the people who'd been quietly carrying the firm for years. Revenue climbed 25% in the first quarter under transparent leadership. The foundation distributed $4 million in its first year, funding arts education programs in 30 public schools. Mom would have loved that part most. She always said that creativity was the one thing you couldn't steal from a child if you taught them to own it early enough. My father disappeared for 4 months. No calls, no letters, no contact through lawyers. He'd moved to a small apartment in Connecticut, funded by the foundation's living allowance, comfortable but modest. Then, a handwritten letter arrived at the foundation office. Not typed, not dictated. His handwriting, but different. Smaller. Less certain. Claire. I've been seeing a therapist 3 times a week. Not because the board required it, though they did. Because I finally ran out of people to blame. I stole your work because I was terrified that without it, I was nobody. That fear doesn't excuse anything. It just explains why a man who had everything still needed to take from his own daughter. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking if there's a version of the future where I can contribute honestly, even in a small way, to the company your mother and you actually built. I sat with that letter for a week before responding. He got a 6-month probation. Limited hours. Supervised. Every interaction documented. He'd work on vendor relationships where his people skills actually added value, reporting to the operations team. One false claim, one stolen credit, and the door closes permanently. It's been 8 months now. He shows up on time. He stays in his lane. He doesn't interrupt in meetings. Last Thursday, during our monthly dinner, the only personal interaction I allow, he said something that surprised me. I watched your presentation to the Wexford board last week. The follow-up campaign. You weren't invited to that meeting. I watched the recording Harrington shared with the advisory board. He paused. It was brilliant, Claire. Genuinely brilliant. And I need you to know that I know that. It's the closest thing to a real apology he's ever given. Not the words "I'm sorry," which are cheap and easy, but the admission that my work has value, independent of his name. I don't know if that's healing. I don't know if it's enough. But it's something. Mom's final letter was hidden in the last place I looked, taped inside the cover of that garden book I'd been reading to her the night she died. She must have placed it there weeks before, knowing I'd eventually return to it. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, you've already proven everything I always knew about you. You're stronger than I was. I stayed too long, hoped too hard, and sacrificed too much of myself trying to change a man who didn't want to change. Don't repeat my mistake. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're the architecture of self-respect. I built you a foundation, literally and figuratively. Not so you'd need it forever, but so you'd have solid ground to stand on while you build something entirely your own. Your father is a small man who needed a big stage. You're the opposite. Your talent will always be larger than any platform you stand on. Don't shrink yourself to make others comfortable. Don't let anyone sign their name to your life. Build beautiful things, my love. Build them loudly, with your name on every cornerstone. All my love, forever, Mom. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the book. Tomorrow, the Wexford campaign launches nationally. My name is on every credit, every press release, every award submission. Not because I demanded it, but because truth doesn't need to demand anything. It just needs the space to exist. The foundation is now valued at $62 million. We've funded 47 scholarships for young women in creative industries. 3 states have introduced legislation on intellectual attribution rights in corporate settings, partly inspired by our story. But tonight, I'm sitting in my own apartment, bought with my own money, looking at my own work on my own walls. Nobody else's name is on any of it. That's the real inheritance my mother left me. Not money, not a company, the bone-deep certainty that I deserve to be seen, credited, and valued for exactly who I am. Boundaries aren't punishment. They're protection. Self-respect isn't selfish. It's the foundation everything else gets built on. And sometimes, the greatest act of love a parent can give is teaching their child that hoping someone will change is not the same as making sure you're safe when they don't. That's where my story ends. But maybe it's where yours begins. If someone in your life is taking credit for your brilliance, diminishing your worth, or making you feel invisible in your own story, remember this. You don't need anyone else's name on your work to make it valuable. You don't need permission to claim what's yours. And you absolutely don't need to wait for someone else to see your worth before you start believing in it yourself. Thank you for listening. Subscribe if this story meant something to you, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. You are worthy, you are enough, and your name belongs on your own life.